Hello, my name is Mary Miele. I am a tutor, a teacher, a parent, and the founder of Evolved Education Company. We are a full-service tutoring and advisement company for all of your educational solutions. On this podcast, we'll explore ideas, techniques, and resources that you can use to support your school-aged child to conquer any learning issue. I'm so glad you're here. Hello, and welcome to the May episode of the Evolved Education Podcast. I have changed our release day to the third week of the month. So if you're seeing this a little later in the month and you're wondering why, that is because we just wanted to get a little better with our systems here in business, which we're always working on. And I am excited today because we have a very, very special person to the Evolved Education community, as well as to me personally, Becky Reback, here to talk with us about collaborative and proactive solutions. And I wanted to have Becky on because this is a program that I first was introduced when my son was at the Gateway School, and they used it there in their way of working with their students. And then I was intrigued enough during the pandemic to ask Becky to train my husband and I on this methodology with our children, as during that time, as I'm sure everyone listening who's a parent can relate to this, we were really with our children in a very intimate way and saw the lagging skills right in front of us in terms of what was going on. And you'll learn all about all these words as we get in here with Becky. But essentially, I'm really grateful for her training with us because it allowed us to really formulate a way of parenting that I think really does align with how we learn and how we want our kids to learn. And that's what's so exciting about it, actually. So I'm going to go ahead now and introduce Becky, let her tell you a little bit about herself and her background, and then we'll really get into this model and what it really can do for your family and your child. So welcome, Becky Reback. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Becky Reback. I am a trained special educator. I focus on students with language-based learning disabilities and attention deficits. I've been in this field for 12 years now, 10 of them in a couple of different schools as a teacher, a learning specialist, a school administrator. So I've sort of had a varied experience, and I came on to Evolved in the fall of 2020, and which was sort of fortuitous, I guess, like given the way the world was at the moment. And my role here is the head of tutor services primarily. And then I also do support other areas of the company. And one of the things that I do is parent and family coaching through the collaborative and proactive solutions model. And, like you said, it's a way that families can really get to know each other in a totally different way that I think most people are used to parenting. I also implemented it at my school across from K through 8th grade. So I have experience implementing it, a collaborative and proactive solutions model in a school, which is a whole different beast than it is in a family, because in school there's other kids and you're a teacher and you're not their parent and all of that. So that's sort of my quick facts.
Amazing. Yes. And let's get into it. So I would love to know, just from a top level perspective, right? What if families are just coming in right now and they're wondering, what is collaborative and proactive solutions? Where did it come from? How does it help kids and adults? Can you give us some of that framework?
Yeah, absolutely. So collaborative and proactive solutions, otherwise known as CPS, which should not be confused with child protective services, but it is in a way child protective because it really does protect feeling and the autonomy of the child. Collaborative and proactive solutions is a collaborative problem-solving model. And it's a process that we use with kids to understand their perspective on why they are having difficulty meeting any given clearly defined expectation. And what we do is we come together with the kids to solve a problem together. So, founded by Dr. Ross Greene, he believes that this process really teaches the skills that are on the better side of humanity, as he says. I quote him a lot. So, these are not my catchphrases, these are his, and he's quite brilliant. So I recommend you read his books and check him out. But anyway, what he says is the better side of humanity is empathy, appreciating how one's behavior is affecting others, resolving disagreements without conflict, taking somebody else's perspective, showing honesty, all the things that we want our kids to be able to do independently without us as they grow up and become adults. So by using this problem-solving model, we're teaching our kids indirectly, this is not a direct instruction model, we're indirectly teaching our kids all the skills that they need to be successful humans. The model is based on the premise that challenging behavior, and actually the CPS has gotten away from calling it challenging behavior and calling it more concerning behavior, because challenging behavior, you really think of hitting and punching and cursing and yelling, right? Or running into the street. But any type of concerning behavior could be used in this model, right? So it could be drawing inward and not talking about what's going on for them. It could be giving you the silent treatment, right? So things that you might not necessarily consider to be challenging. So that's why they switched it over to concerning behavior. So we believe that concerning behavior occurs when the expectation that is placed on the child exceeds the child's ability to meet the expectation and respond adaptively. So we believe in the CPS model that kids that are having difficulty responding to an expectation, in a way that an appropriate way, is they are lacking certain skills to handle the demands and expectations that we are placing on them. So, there's so much that we can get into with expectations and all of that. But, the model is based on the idea that you tell your kids what the expectations are, so you meet those expectations. But there are times that they are lacking in certain skills, and so they cannot meet the expectations. And that's where concerning behavior comes across. So that could look like ignoring you. That could look like failing a test, right? Maybe they don't know how to study. There's so many different areas that we could get into. And the way that we determine what skills they're lacking in is we use an assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problem, otherwise known as the ALSUP, ALSUP, assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. That tool allows us to be proactive in our approach to our kids and talk about the problem before it might come up again.
Yeah, this was a very interesting change for me. And once I was trained in it, it makes such good sense. And I think all along my parenting journey, I've always had a little bit of an understanding of the need to be proactive. But I've heard things such as don't fuel the fire, when your child's in the middle of a tantrum, let them be, then talk to them. I've heard little things like that in my life, but I think this model really gave me more skills to be able to have conversations with my kids away from the situation that was concerning to me. And it allowed us to dialogue in a very compassionate, calm, collaborative manner that allowed us to have a relationship. And I think something that really drives home for me is that as a parent, you only have your child for 18 years of their life in terms of really raising them technically. And at that point, what do you want? You want to be able to have a conversation with your child about life, about concepts in the world, about what they're thinking about what problems they're encountering and how they're handling those problems. You want to have that kind of relationship with them. And I think that just doesn't happen overnight. It happens because you've spent 18 years with them, really helping them to find their voice and to share their ideas and to not necessarily be the one doing for them the whole entire time. Mm-hmm. And idea that this model presents to me is one that I think a lot of parents can get behind in their parenting journey, right? So I really appreciated the frameworks that the model brings in. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about those frameworks and what parents can kind of expect to gain if they go through this training. What are those tangible pieces? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to back up for a second because I think you said something that was really, really important. And that is that the emphasis is on the relationship. So for me, whenever I'm doing my parent and family coaching, or when I was coaching this in schools, I was never focused on solving the problem at the end of the conversation that you have. It's a pretty prescriptive model that I think trips people up a little bit because there are definite steps you have to take and certain ways that you're going to pose the question, and which I can talk through, of course, but and I would always say, and I'm sure I said this to you and your husband too, which was, it's great if we come up with a solution at the end of this conversation, these plan B conversations that we have through this model. Great if we come up with a solution, even better if the solution works. But what I want the adults really to focus on is the relationship that they are creating with their kids, and whether it be their students or their kids in their home, and giving the kids the opportunity to share their point of view. And what a gift you're giving to your kids to say, I believe what it is that you are saying. And the more you are able to listen to your kids, because as adults, I think we don't really listen to kids. There were so many parents that I've coached through this model that have said, I listen to my kid all the time. We talk all the time. But after we would go through a Plan B conversation, they would say, I was never actually listening. I was just letting them talk. And then I was interjecting and saying what I thought. And then we would just do what I thought and move on, right? So I always like to focus on the relationship part of it, because like you said, you have a finite period of time where you're raising your kids. And what do you want for them as an adult when they enter college or the workplace or something like that, and they're in an uncomfortable situation? Not only do you want them to be able to come back to you and talk to you about it, but you also want them, let's say they're in the workplace and they're having a conflict with their boss. You don't want them just to quit because they don't like their boss. You want them to have the skills to go to their boss and have a problem-solving conversation about it. Right? So not only are you opening up the door for you to have a positive relationship with a collaborative and positive relationship with your child, but you're opening up the door for them to have those types of relationships with their significant other, their friends, their coworkers, whoever it might be in the future. So now I'll get back to your actual question, which is the principles of the model. So there are 6 key themes that, are paramount to the model. And they're really that the emphasis is on problem solving. So in this model, we are not modifying behaviors. We're not trying to change a behavior. The negative behavior will change and disappear, as we are solving problems, because we're actually getting to the root of the problem. So CPS believes that reward charts, sticker charts, incentives are just stickers or just band-aids on a problem. And you're not actually getting to the root of the problem, which is why a sticker chart works for a period of time for sure, and then it stops working, right? In school, the best example would that be a behavior modification plan works for a period of time for sure, and then it stops working because you haven't actually solved the problem that's actually going on for the kid in school. So we really focus on solving problems, not modifying behaviors. The second key theme is that problem solving is collaborative. So we're doing this with the kid, not to the kid. We're proactive. That's a major, major part in this. And I mentioned the ALSUP, the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. That allows us to be proactive. That is a list of all the lagging skills that we're seeing and the unsolved problems that we're seeing in our kids. So we're able to say, okay, difficulty brushing his teeth before getting into bed is our major problem. My son never brushes his teeth, right? So we know this is a problem that's going to come up. It's happening frequently. We go to bed every single night, right? That's pretty frequent. So we're going to tackle that problem first. That's the first unsolved problem we're going to solve. And we're going to do it before it's time to brush his teeth at night. We're going to do it in the morning at breakfast when it's a totally neutral time. And we're going to say, hey, bud, I noticed you're having difficulty brushing your teeth before you get into bed at night. What's up? Right? So we're being proactive. So you said, managing those tantrums and those big behaviors. Well, we're hopefully reducing those because we've proactively solved the problem. A major one is that understanding comes before helping. So as parents and caregivers, our role is to be helpers. In order to help our kid, we need to know, we need to understand what's going on for them inside. So we don't theorize, we don't tell them what we think is going on. We listen and let them tell us what they think is going on. And then the biggest two that kind of mush together are, and this is the CPS motto. So if you take anything away from this podcast, it's this: kids do well if they can. That's number 5. And doing well is preferable. That's number 6. But I really count them together. So kids do well if they can. This is often a very aha moment for caregivers and teachers who are going through the coaching. In the CPS model, we believe that if kids could do well, if they could meet your expectation, they would. Most people don't want to do poorly, right? Doing well is preferable. It is easier to meet expectations, right? You can think about this with your partner. When you're frustrated about something, it's easier if everybody just is on the same page all the time, right? So we really believe that kids do well if they can. And that's sort of a little mantra you can say in your head. If you're having a tough moment with your kid, you could stop, you could say, okay, kids do well if they can. Right now, whatever's going on for him or her, she cannot do well. She's having difficulty meeting my expectation. Kids do well if they can, right? So that's something that really also aligns with the Evolved Education Company, right? Where really whole child, we believe kids, when they come in needing tutoring or support, it's because there's some skill that's lagging for them. And we believe that they can do well and that there's something in their way and blocking them. It's the same thing in the collaborative and proactive solutions model. We believe kids would do well, but there is some skill that they don't have that's getting in their way. So those are the 6 key themes. I mean, I could go on and on probably.
No, this is so good. This is such good learning. And it really helped me and my husband to do this together because we really were able to get on the same page with the words that we were using in our own parenting. And that notion of kids do well if they can aligns so well with how I've always taught children in special education, and primarily, especially around those lagging skills that kids can have. But I don't know that there has been another time in my career and life where it's all come together for me in such a poignant way. And I think that is something very powerful that all adults can really marry, understand, congratulate in their world of parenting, is just to know kids do well if they can, and doing well is preferred. It's just such a good way of thinking about behaviors. And the next question I have is a little more particular, and it's probably more particular to me. I don't know that everyone will have this challenge, but I certainly really appreciated the notion of asking my child questions about the scenario that I was concerned about. So going back to your instance around, I'm noticing that you're having trouble brushing your teeth at night. What's up? That would be the first question that you would pose. And sometimes children who aren't used to being interviewed in this way or asked might come up with nothing at all or something very confused on their end. And so you gave us a list of probing questions to continue to ask our child until they got to the point where they could share with us. Could you share a few of those questions with the audience to give them a little flavor of what they might be able to learn for that part?
Absolutely. Before I do that, I just want to back up and explain when these questions come into play, because I think that's really important. So there's definitely steps to this model that are really important to take, and you kind of can't do one without the other. So the first thing is to do your assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. There's a checklist and we go through it, and it gives us prompts to think about unmet expectations or unsolved problems, things that our kids are having expectations that our kids are having difficulty meeting. So we go through the assessment of lagging skills. We write down every single unsolved problem or unmet expectation. I'm using them interchangeably because they are interchangeable. An unsolved problem is an unmet expectation. And then we prioritize. We prioritize based on safety, frequency, and gravity. So obviously anything that relates to safety, we're solving first. That's a major, we have to be safe. So we're doing that first. Then frequency, I gave the toothbrushing example. That happens every single day. We're going to tackle that one because that's really impacting our lives. And then gravity is, it's not happening all that much, but when it does, it's a huge deal. So safety, frequency, gravity. Once we've prioritized, we pick the top 3 that we're going to solve, and we do one problem at a time. Why do we do that? We're not Wonder Women and men. We cannot solve more than one problem at a time. We prioritize so we can focus on one problem at a time. So we pick our number 1 problem, then we go to our plan B conversation. The plan B conversation has 3 steps. It has the empathy step, the define the problem step, or the define adult concern step, and then the invitation step. In the empathy step, this is where we are posing our unsolved problem to the child. Again, I said this already, but it's sort of important to note that it's a very prescriptive model in the sense that you are using specific language. And I've done this with kids with language learning disabilities, and it still works. So it can work. Dr. Green literally did the research for this in prison and it worked. So if it can work in prison, it can work for us. So we start off with, I've noticed that, and then you insert your unsolved problem and you end with what's up, as Mary said. So I've noticed that you're having difficulty brushing your teeth before getting into bed at night. What's up? Then the kid will talk or they won't talk. And that's when we use what you were saying, the drilling strategies. And we use these strategies to help us gather more information. The most important part of the empathy step is that you as the adult are gathering information so you have a clear understanding of what's coming up for the kid to any given unsolved problem. So it's not that the kid thinks you understand, it's that you have a clear understanding. So you could ask questions until the cows come home, as long as you understand what's coming up for the kid. So the most used drilling strategy, and probably the, I guess, quote, easiest one to use would be reflective listening and clarifying statements. And so that is literally repeating back, reflecting on what the kid said. So let's say with the toothbrushing example, they say, the bristles tickle my gums. So you would say, the bristles tickle your gums. And then you're going to ask a clarifying statement. Tell me more about that, right? Or the toothpaste burns my tongue. The toothpaste burns your tongue. How so? Right? What does that feel like? So you're just asking questions, but giving a statement of what they said. You're repeating what they said, you're reflecting on it, and you're really telling them in that moment, I'm really listening to you. There is nothing more powerful to anybody, an adult, a kid, whatever it is, than reflecting back what they said, because that really tells the other person you are really listening to them. So reflective listening and clarifying statements. Quite frankly, you can conduct an entire Plan B conversation with reflective listening and clarifying statements. There are other drilling strategies that we use. I won't get into all of them, but that are really great for different points in a conversation. But you could really have a whole conversation with reflective listening and clarifying statements. Something else that I think is really important, one of the other drilling strategies, is summarizing and asking for more concerns. So after we've gotten a bunch of concerns, because our kids are going to tell us a lot of different things, we have to be able to prioritize. There's that word again, prioritize what their concerns are. Then you summarize what they said. You say, okay, let me make sure I got this straight. The bristles on the brush tickle your gums. The toothpaste burns your tongue. And 2 minutes is just way too long to brush your teeth. So I've summarized now the 3 things the kid has talked about. And then I say, is there anything else that is getting in the way of brushing your teeth before bed at night? I'm seeing, is there anything else that's happening for you? These 3 things are going on. Anything else you want to tell me? And again, you're really telling the child that you are really listening to them by reflecting back what they said and then asking for more. So those, I think, would be the top 2 strategies that I usually fall back on. There's others that are obviously equally as important. And in my coaching, I get into all of them and I give people very specific examples based on their unsolved problems that you can use in various points of the conversation. But I think what's the most important to note is that in the conversation, your goal as the adult is to listen, but also to make sure that the conversation is moving forward. So if you're unsure about something, ask a question about it. But also, sometimes things aren't really related. So when I'm confused about because kids will just say things, right? And you're like, I don't really understand how that's related. Then you can throw it back to the unsolved problem. You could say, so let's say the kid said, the dog is at my feet. Okay, so the dog is at your feet. How does that get in the way of brushing your teeth before bed? Right? And maybe it's like nothing. I just, the dog's just there. And then, okay. Or maybe it's, well, I really want to stand on the step stool to see in the mirror, but the dog is standing on my feet. And then you've opened up a whole other can of worms, so to speak, but you're really understanding what's going on. The biggest thing I think that's the hardest part for adults in this conversation is not talking as much as we're used to. And really sitting back and really listening and reflecting on what our kids are saying. And, I coached you and your husband through this too, which is believing what your child is saying is true. Even if in your head, you're like, no way, that's not true. This is ridiculous. Just believe them. And maybe it's not true. And we're going to have to come back to the conversation, but maybe it is true for them. And I think our kids are so used to not being listened to and not being believed that it's shocking to them when you take what they say at face value and just believe what it is. I think that's a huge part of this for adults. And a lot of this is the adult getting out of your own way.
Always. It's really so true. I mean, that was incredible because I think our unsolved problem at the time was that we were making dinner. Remember that? And our child wasn't coming up for dinner. It was driving us crazy because it was one of those frequency pieces that was affecting everyone's mood and everyone in the family's ability to sit down. It was annoying. And when we asked about why it wasn't happening, the reason was he wasn't hungry at that time. And that blew our minds because I think we were both so convinced it was because he didn't want to separate from what he was doing downstairs. We defined the problem ahead of time as that. And we were parenting him accordingly. Like, you got to figure out a way to stop doing what you're doing downstairs. But that wasn't his reason for not wanting to come upstairs. And so when he said, I'm not hungry, then we said, oh, okay. Like, what if we move dinner back a half an hour? Would that help? And all of a sudden he said, yes, that would help. We did that and everything was fine.
Yeah.
It was so incredible.
I know you had an awesome experience with this in the sense that we did a couple of plan Bs together and each one just worked and it was great. I mean, it was, I was like, I'm either amazing or
my kids just really know their problems and they know exactly.
And we started with your oldest who had been exposed to this at school. So he knew what was going on.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always work so seamlessly for kids or for families. And I think that's important to note that this takes time. And again, back to that relationship piece is that we are working on rebuilding the trust between parent and child. The kid needs to trust that you're actually going to listen to them. Like you mentioned this before, where you said, most kids haven't been listened to and asked in this way. So it's really kind of, first of all, it's exhausting to have the conversation. Second of all, it's surprising to them and they're a little confused. They're like, is my caregiver really going to believe what I say and follow through on it and be okay with this? And so there are baby steps involved and it does take time. It's not an overnight fix, but sometimes we do get into situations where we have a solution and it works and it's amazing. And I think I love when that happens because it gives the whole family the confidence to keep going. I think what happens often is that the first time you have the conversation, it's a little rocky and kids aren't sure and parents aren't sure. And then the solution is kind of this crazy outlandish solution, which is where coaches come involved because I can say, whoa, this seems like a really big solution. Take a step back and it's just too much for everyone to uphold their ends of each end of the bargain. So you have to revisit the table. but sometimes it works great. So, it's a dance for sure.
I agree. And what was the rule on the solution? I think that could be helpful to share.
Absolutely. So this solution is the last step. So after we do the empathy step, we do the define adult concern step or define the problem step. And that is where the adult has the opportunity to enter their concerns into consideration. So the adult can then say, and again, I always like to coach this. I think it's really important. The kids don't have to like your concern. They don't have to agree with your concern. They do have to respect that it's your concern. Just like in the whole empathy step, you respected what they were saying as their concerns. They need to do that too. And they need to understand what you're saying in the sense that they get that it is your concern, right? They don't need to be understanding and agree that it's a concern, but it's your concern, and that's valid too. After that, we have the invitation step. The invitation step is where you recap both parties' concerns. And that's why I said we really need to prioritize. So if the kid has more than one concern and the adult has more than one concern, each party needs to pick which concern is their biggest one. So we prioritize and we recap both parties' concerns, and we open the door for the child to come up with a solution. The solution, we have to be able to, for it to be realistic, meaning both parties can uphold their end of the bargain, and it has to be mutually satisfactory, which means it addresses the child's concern as well as the adult's concern. And I think that's a big misconception with this model, because we spend so much time listening to the children that we're just giving up everything and just doing whatever the kid wants. And that's not the case. And in fact, that's not the way the model is meant to be. Our solutions are meant to address the adult concern as well. That's what makes it collaborative. So if you're doing this model and you're giving up on your concern and just addressing whatever the kid wants, then you're basically just doing a reward chart, right? You're not really doing collaborative problem solving because your concern is not being met. So it has to be realistic, the solution, and it has to be mutually satisfactory. And we spend time evaluating solutions to make sure they meet that criteria. And if it doesn't, right, let's say, so the kid always has the first opportunity to come up with a solution. And let's say for the toothbrushing example, they say, I'm going to brush my teeth in front of the television. And maybe if it gets them to brush for 2 minutes, great. But I don't know, that doesn't really work for me because toothpaste drips and then it's on my carpet. And like, you do need to spit out the toothpaste, you need to rinse your mouth and wash the toothbrush out. And I don't really want you watching television that close to going to bed because we brush our teeth and get into bed. Right? So you're allowed to say, thank you so much for providing that solution. It's really hard to think of solutions. Amazing that you thought of something. That's not going to work. And that doesn't address my concern. Right? And then you go back to the drawing board and you evaluate one solution at a time. That's really key. You're not giving a list or a menu for kids to pick from. You're putting a solution on the table and you're evaluating if it's realistic and mutually satisfactory for both parties involved. And we're not going to agree on something that the kid doesn't agree on, and we're not going to agree on something that the caregiver doesn't agree on. I think that's such an important piece of this, that you as the adult are still putting your concern on the table and getting to address it in the solution.
Amazing. I think this is so helpful in terms of introducing this concept to parents and the power that it does hold for the possibility in the relationships that we have with our children and with ourselves as parents, honestly, too. It's really been super helpful for our family. We're so grateful for it. And I don't know, now that I know how to do it, if I could go back to another way of handling any of the issues that we have in our family. And I just think it's sort of that way, right? You invest in this training, and it was an investment. We spent time with you. Our child spent time with you. We really did slow things down and sit in a mess, if you will, for a little bit of time to learn these skills well. And then as we became better at the process, it became our own in some ways. And I think that's really what it's all about, right? So I wanted to give everyone a chance to learn about where to find you if they want to do this coaching work. How does it work? Where do they go? How do they sign up? What can they expect? All of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do the collaborative and proactive solutions coaching through Evolved Education. You can certainly reach out to me and my email, which is becky@evolveded.com. It's very easy. We have information about this on our website as well. We do 5 sessions of coaching because we hit each part of the model. And in this, I do a modeled plan B. So I'm showing the parents how to do it with the child. And then I do a coach plan B, which is really important for the caregiver to know how to be actually doing it where I'm coaching them through this. So if you're interested, you can always reach out and I'm happy to talk through and it's totally customizable. I've had people come and, find me and say, I've been doing CPS for years, but I just sort of feel like we need to be fine-tuned. Then I skip the intro part because they already know the principles of the model, right? So it's totally customizable for your knowledge based on the model. And some people, even if they have been, still want the introductory because they want to just be refreshed. And I think that's always great too. I'm also listed on the Collaborative and Proactive Solutions, their website. It's called Lives in the Balance. And then they have a sister website called CPS Connection as a certified provider. So I did go through the training through CPS and I became a certified provider. And I recently went through the training. Well, I guess it was last fall or spring. I can't even remember at this point, but to implement it in schools as well. So I have the ability to do that. So, if you have questions, you can reach out and we're always happy to talk and customize a plan. And I love working with families. I think it's so interesting. And my favorite is when we change a mindset. I think that's just key, and change a relationship. I have had success in the sense that even if they haven't solved problems, the relationship, I've had parents come to me and say, our relationship is so much better because we're just able to talk. So sometimes problems just sort of go away because you can just talk. You don't even need the solution sometimes.
Sure. It's why it works and why I said what I said before, which is you go through the training. It's an investment to learn the process, to learn the skills, to learn the tools and the approach. And then you can make it your own using the frameworks that work best for your relationship. But I agree with you. I think this is such a fabulous program. I'm so pleased to have you at Evolved doing this work, and it certainly aligns with our mission. So I do hope everyone does connect with Becky if you're interested and make this a priority to learn more about. Thank you so much to everybody. As we close up this podcast, I just want to remind you that Evolved Education serves families from nursery all the way through college. We do tutoring services as well as parent education, coaching, and school placement from nursery through college. We are set up right now to help families through their admissions process this fall. And also you can connect with Becky as well for tutoring in the summertime months, which we are starting right now as this podcast drops. So thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you next month, the 3rd week of the month. We will be dropping these podcasts. If you have questions, you can reach out to me personally at mary@evolveded.com. Thank you so much for listening to Evolved Education. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and write a review. You can send us any and all educational questions to hello@evolveded.com, and we'll try to address it in our upcoming episodes. That's Evolved Ed, EVOLVEDED.com. To learn more about how we can support you, go to evolveded.com and book a complimentary 15-minute phone call with us. Are you a professional educator? You can join our teaching school membership platform to gain support and engage in a community interested in learning together. Click on the link in our show notes to learn more.